can answer that, Spider-Man.
Who are you?
My name is Professor Miles Warren.
Since his introduction in September 1965, Miles Warren has been quite an interesting character. The good-natured scientist seemingly took a darker turn, and before we knew it, in October of 1973, in the 129th issue of Amazing Spider-Man, we come face to face with one of the more elaborate villains that Spider-Man has ever faced off against, the Jackal. In today's video, we will take a deep dive into all of his arcs and see what type of shenanigans the Jackal put Spider-Man through, and how his amazing villainous arc came burning on its way down, quite literally. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin. Backstory of Miles Warren before he becomes Jackal. Miles Warren was an intelligent man. He was an academic man with rather scholarly interests. He was a researcher at heart, but a professor by profession. At Empire State University, he worked as a biochemistry professor. However, his heart and mind were both focused on research, specifically genetics, an untapped minefield for research. His interest in genetics and cloning led him to working for High Evolutionary. High Evolutionary is Dr. Herbert Wyndham, who figured out a way to perform genetic modification using a serum that he received discussed as inhumane. Using that serum, Dr. Wyndham became the High Evolutionary, the geneticist who is obsessed with exploring human genetics and is always seen working on his projects, known as the New Men, which are animal-human hybrids. If you are wondering if this is the same High Evolutionary you saw in Guardians of the Galaxy 3, then you're right. High Evolutionary always worked with genetics, so no teacher was better than him for Miles Warren. So under the tutelage of High Evolutionary, Miles Warren began his journey as a geneticist. However, there was one issue. High Evolutionary wanted to know about genetics and accelerated evolution. On the other hand, Miles Warren was much more curious about cloning, something High Evolutionary did not find appealing. While working on the New Men with High Evolutionary, Miles Warren showed a certain curiosity in one of the animals, a jackal. He turned the jackal into a man-jackal hybrid without informing the High Evolutionary. Soon enough, the news of this man-jackal reached the High Evolutionary, and High Evolutionary wanted nothing to do with him. So with that, Miles Warren was let go. However, that did not stop Miles Warren. Miles Warren was able to make new men who looked almost human. This led to a lot of new men worshipping after him in the hopes of reaching that human form. So when he was leaving, he promised those new men that eventually he was going to make them human. This led to those new men believing that whatever Miles Warren had planned for them was good enough, and they left the High Evolutionary to follow in the footsteps of Miles Warren and hail him as their god. These new men ended up in their own space where Miles Warren would occasionally drop by and help them out as he continued his research. What he did not know, however, was that the man-jackal he had created was stalking him. The man-jackal had developed a Jekyll and Hyde personality, unbeknownst to him and the High Evolutionary. The man-jackal learned of Miles Warren and his new family with a wife and 2 kids. Eventually, Miles's obsession with his work ruined the relationship that he had with his wife, and that led to her leaving with the kids. When she and the kids were in the car, the man-jackal attacked them and killed them. These are the tragic origins of the best-known Spider-Man villain. Fell in love with Gwen Stacy. Once he realized that his wife and children were no longer there, Miles Warren decided to shift to Manhattan, and as luck would have it, he was the professor of Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy. Now when he met Gwen and Peter, Miles Warren instantly caught feelings for Gwen. His romantic interest in Gwen made him confused, and instead, he tried to treat Gwen as his daughter. Due to his job as a professor, for an experiment, he collected the cells from all his students, including Gwen and Peter. Using these cells, Warren wanted to make a serum that would turn the almost human-looking new men more human-looking. But something went horribly wrong. The serum that he had ended up making was not stable. While at first it did make a new man seem more human-like, soon enough there was cell degeneration. His cell degeneration was rapid and could not be arrested in time. Soon enough, the new man turned into a living corpse. This was a prototype of the carrion virus that Jackal eventually created, but Warren was unaware of what his future held for him. Things took a turn for the worse when Gwen passed passed away. As we know, Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy had a face-off against the Green Goblin, and by the end, Gwen had lost her life. This grief over losing Gwen drove Miles Warren over the edge. He was unable to cope with the grief that he was feeling until he got a rather twisted idea. Anthony Serber was Miles's lab assistant. He worked specifically on cloning. When he successfully cloned a full-grown frog, he wanted to share his successful experiment with his colleague Miles Warren. What Serber did not know was that his colleague would decide to take his interest in cloning to the next level. Miles gave Serber the cells he had of Gwen and Peter. He told Anthony they were cells he collected from a rat and asked him to start cloning. However, this was not going to end well because human cloning is not ethical in the slightest. The first clone he successfully created was this ugly bootleg clone of Gwen Stacy, which was known as Abby L. This clone had a special power that allowed her to destroy any living being that she touched. Miles Warren basically struck a deal with her, saying that he would stop cloning humans if she promised not to touch him. However, soon after Abby L. left, Miles Warren went back to his experiments. Eventually, he had another successful human clone. This was a clone of Peter Parker, and even though Miles Warren wanted to kill him, he could not. And this clone is who we know as Kane Parker. The transformation of Miles Warren to the Jackal. As we mentioned earlier, human cloning is not ethical in the slightest. So understandably, when Anthony Serber, the geneticist who has been working in that field, saw the clones that were developing from the rat cells given by Miles Warren, he immediately confronted him. He told him that human clones had to be killed, but Warren was not ready. He covered Serber's mouth in an attempt to shut him up, but accidentally ended up suffocating and killing him. Now this incident weighs heavy on Miles Warren. He could not accept it himself that he had killed his lab assistant, and he disassociated to cope with it. He created another personality, the heinous and murderous one who killed Anthony Serber, to free himself from the guilt of murdering him. This personality is what we know as the Jackal. After this disassociation that led to the creation of the Jackal's personality, Miles Warren talked about the Jackal one day in class. While talking about it, he thought about the Jackal man that he had created and decided to embrace that identity. He felt that there was one person who was guilty of Gwen Stacy's untimely death, and that was Spider-Man himself. While he was crazy, Miles Warren was not stupid. He knew that if he went ahead right now and approached Spider-Man to take revenge for Gwen's death, he would be the loser. So instead, he took his time. He got himself a green suit, trained his body, and even made claws to feed into the whole Jackal persona that he had created. He was going to use this persona to avenge Gwen Stacy. While doing all of this, Miles also focused a lot on the cloning process. He tried to kill that Spider-Man clone, who we know as Kane, because the clone was showing signs of degeneration. However, over the months of hard work, he figured out a way to create clones without degeneration. At first, Jackal decides to use Punisher, aka Francis Castle, to kill Spider-Man, but his ploy was foiled soon enough. Seeing as this attempt was unsuccessful, Jackal decided to use some other technique instead. This time, he sent a clone of Gwen Stacy to torture Spider-Man emotionally. However, seeing Gwen Stacy suddenly made Aunt May faint, which led to Peter admitting her to the hospital. The hospital is a very vulnerable place to attack, but Jackal could not care any less. He told Scorpion, the superpowered criminal menace, to go to the hospital and attack Spider-Man. However, Peter was not in his spider suit there, which confused Scorpion. He entered the hospital room and saw a sick lady and her nephew, which effectively saved Aunt May's life. Later, Peter caught Scorpion and he was arrested by the police. But this is not the end. Jackal got to Tarantula, the South American criminal who was living in Manhattan, and together they took Spider-Man to the George Washington Bridge where Gwen was killed. They tied Spider-Man up and dropped him in the water, not knowing that Spider-Man would survive this. Peter and Ned Leeds showed up at Miles Warren's place and asked him about the mysterious Gwen Stacy who keeps showing up. Warren told them things that made them wonder if Anthony Serber was the culprit. When Spider-Man went to the deceased's apartment, he was ambushed by Tarantula. That is where Spider-Man learned that Jackal was Miles Warren all along. Later, Warren kidnaps Spider-Man and tells him to come meet him at the Shears Stadium to save Ned Leeds, whom he had kidnapped. When Peter showed up there, he saw Miles Warren and Ben Reilly, the second clone of Spider-Man Warren had made. With the time bomb ticking away, Spider-Man fought with Ben Reilly in the hopes of saving Ned. However, the bomb went off right at the nick of time, and everyone was buried under the rubble, and Miles Warren was dead. Or was he? Revenge of Jackal. Once the smoke clears, we find out that Miles Warren, who just died, is just a copy of the actual Miles Warren. He uncovered Spider-Man's identity, and oh well, once the cat was out of the bag, he decided to inject the original Spider-Man with his very own, homemade, lab-made death simulator drug that made the original Spider-Man seem very dead. The Spider clone dropped this original Spider-Man body in the smokestack. However, later the Jackal retrieved the body of the original Spider-Man and replaced it with the failed clone of Spider-Man in the smokestack, which was later found. Now, with the original Spider-Man body that Jackal got, he wiped the memories of Spider-Man and replanted new memories, leading him to think that he is Ben Reilly and go around the city as Scarlet Spider. However, here's where things get a little confusing, so dear viewers, better hold on. It turns out that Squire, the man who was helping Miles Warren with his cloning work for such a long time, was actually working for Norman Osborn. This Squire is also the man who got Miles Warren his new lab assistant, Seward Trainer. Because Trainer was under direct orders from Osborn, he messed up Warren's equipment. This led to Warren making the Spider-Man clone for the original Spider-Man. So all along, Peter Parker was safe and did not get his memories wiped. The clone got the new memories and eventually became Ben Reilly. Osborn did this because he wanted to take revenge on Spider-Man and did not want to give that space to anyone else. The Spider-Man clone that was dropped in the smokestack by Jackal was a separate failed clone that he had dropped there to confuse everyone. After this, Jackal started using a genetically enhanced clone of himself to torment the two spiders, Spider-Man and Scarlet Spider. Eventually, when Ben was killed by Norman Osborn, Warren collected his DNA sample. The Jackal comes into the Spider Island. Now, as we know, the Kravinoff family killed Kane Parker to rescue Kraven the Hunter. As Kane was the first ever Spider-Man clone of his, Jackal decided to get the body of his fallen son. But while there, he was attacked by Abby L., the Gwen Stacy clone, who could disintegrate anything living by touching it. She attacked him because they had a deal that Jackal would stop the cloning and she would not touch him. Jackal did not keep the end of his deal, which led to Abby L. attacking him. Kane had mutated into this huge spider monster after his death, and he ended up falling apart thanks to Abby L. and her touch. This is when Adriana Soria, better known as the Queen, showed up. She informed Jackal that she had brought Abby L. back into the picture, and this was done to test Jackal. As she was happy with the result, she gave Jackal the cells she had collected from Peter Parker when she turned him into a spider. Happy with this addition, Jackal joined Adriana Soria's crusade. Together, they decided to infect the people of Manhattan with giant spiders that would be under her control. With the increase in subjects under her control, Queen's powers would increase because of her connection to the web of life and destiny. Jackal released several bugs in the city of Manhattan with the spider virus that gave everyone infected the powers that Spider-Man had. He knew that this plan was going to fail, so he sent a clone of himself with Adriana Soria to see the chaos. When Soria eventually died, the clone collected her DNA samples from her corpse. Jackal is clearly a very cold and calculative villain. The Jackal's Twisted Fate, final chapter of Miles Warren. Remember when we said that Jackal had collected samples of Ben Reilly's DNA? Yeah, well, this time around, he would use them. Over the years, Jackal had worked on cloning and fine-tuned the method of cloning, eventually figuring out how to bring people back to life. Well, not technically, but something very close to it. He figured out a way to bring back a clone with all the old memories that it used to have. He did that with Ben Reilly when he brought it back. However, these clones still showed cellular degeneration that Miles did not want. He repeatedly kept killing Ben and resurrecting him with the new memories until the point of his multiple deaths. So when Ben figured out a way to get out of the shackles, he attacked Jackal. Instead of killing him then and there, he decided to torture him in a very different way and knock him out. When Miles woke up, he was convinced by Ben, but he was one of the many Miles Warren clones that Ben Reilly had made and was forced to work for the pills that would keep the cellular degeneration at bay. Ben took the identity of Jackal and found new U technologies, using Miles's knowledge for the good of society. Eventually, Ben set off a signal that led to the destabilization of all the new U clones, and Miles Warren realized that he was the original. He was very vengeful and decided to go and break into Ben's safe house. This safe house was built by Miles himself when he was working for Ben, so he knew the ins and outs of it, and when Ben arrived at the safe house, Warren set fire to it. However, Ben came out victorious from their battle, and Warren was left to die under the burning rubble of the safe house. Other media appearances of the Jackal. While we have yet to see Jackal being adapted to the big screen, we have seen Jackal make a few memorable appearances in TV shows over the years. His first appearance was in the two-part animated series known as Spiderman, the animated series. In the episode The Return of Hydro Man, it is revealed that the clone of Hydro Man and Mary Jane Watson were created by Miles Warren and his illegal experiments that were funded by Silvermane. Warren is seen collecting Spider-Man's DNA in the episode with the intention of cloning the hero as well. In the episode, I Really Hate Clones, an alternate version of Warren appears. He captures Peter Parker and makes a clone of him. Then Miles Warren tampers with the memories of both of them, leading to one being the Scarlet Spider and the other becoming Spider Carnage. In the Spider-Man animated series, Miles Warren is voiced by the amazing Jonathan Harris, who really brought this villain to life. Brian George voiced the role of the evil geneticist in Spectacular Spider-Man, where the geneticist is of East Indian descent, and his brother Raymond, who was known as Aaron in the series, is Peter's high school biology teacher. In Marvel's Spider-Man, John DiMaggio voices the Jackal, who turns out to be Raymond Warren and not Miles Warren. Marvelous verdict. Jackal may not be a very popular Spider-Man villain. Still, since his introduction, Miles Warren has created a lot of significant story arcs in Peter Parker's life, which has turned Peter into the hero we know and love. Whether you love him or hate him, you have to admit that Miles Warren definitely had some elaborate plots. Maybe not as elaborate as Tommy Elliot from the DC Universe, but definitely elaborate. As fans of Spidey, we are waiting to see if the geneticist will ever get a big screen adaptation, and if he does, which arc of his will be explored. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave and like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thank you, everyone.
Need some repairs down here. Perhaps soon I might make some stuff.